very convinced that CSDP, there is no alternate solution to CSDP as far as the security of our continent is concerned in the future. The aim of the study was to assess, evaluate how the orientation given by the European Council on the basis of the Lisbon Treaty in the field of crisis management have been implemented and for what result, success or failure. One word about methodology and structure of the study, starting from a review of the scope and general frame of reference laid down for the CSDP by the Lisbon Treaty, and a reminder of the main European Council guidelines and decisions, outcome of the summits mentioned by Josephine just before. The study focused on how crisis management is currently managed by the EU in the operational field, namely as far as operational planning, command and control, rapid response, and fourth generation are concerned. Proceeding from thorough consideration of the current reference documents, open source predominantly, EU primary and secondary legislation, and drawing also on conversation about their implementation with senior officials involved in different stages of the decision-making process. It pinpoints the shortcomings and suggests possible ways of improving matters, drawing substance also of my own experience in NATO, in the EU, and at national level. Focusing primarily on technical military aspects, it seeks to go beyond the substantial body of writings that has already arisen out of CSDP missions. And I start with the first item, which is planning, operational planning. The process now used by the EU to plan operation is well ordered, but cumbersome and therefore slow. Since the Treaty of Lisbon entered into force in 2009, the time lag between the approval of a crisis management concept and the decision to launch an operation has ranged from 40 days to 1 year. It results of the very large numbers of persons involved in what an intergovernmental system is, and a great many bodies encompassed within the global approach which the EU applies to crisis management. It can be speeded up when there is an emergency, but only with limits as time necessary to do the right job must not be too compressed, otherwise you lose quality. Some improvements, from my perspective, some improvements could, however, be made. First, by rationalizing the present structure of the European External Action Service, the Deputy Secretary General level could encompass the task of political synthesis, coordination, and organization of the overall approach, which would thus be shifted upwards from the entity currently handling them, the Crisis Management Planning Directorate. The Deputy Secretary General responsible for CSDP would, in that way, exercise authority directly over the three specialized entities, which are the European Union Military Staff, the Civilian Planning and Conduct Capability, and the Intelligence Center. This would, to some extent, eliminate some overlapping between the CMPD and the EUMS. Second, it would also be useful for the EU to have a general joint force deployment concept, since the fact that such document does not exist at present casts doubt on its ability and willingness to conduct enforcement operations. And this document, from my perspective, should make a bridge between the EU global strategy and the military action on potential theaters, in depicting in particular how the different services should operate jointly. The third item will be treated in the following item. It is the absence of center for planning and conducting operation, which of course does not simplify the operational planning at the EU level. And it is a transition to my second item, which bear on operation mission command and control. The fact that there is no complete permanent military command chain is undermining the EU's credibility as a credible security actor. It means that EU operation cannot aspire a level of ambition beyond the responsibilities that a lead nation can accept, whether in political terms or in terms of capability. And maybe during question and answer, I could come back on this particular remark with example that I lived from within the structure. It causes, second, additional delays, and to that extent weakens the EU's ability to respond to crisis. Third, it is inconsistent with the global approach because it translates into separate civilian and military chain of command. Four, it has the effect of overburdening, it's a consequence, the EU military staff, the only permanent European military body which is compelled to overstep its powers and term of reference in order to meet all the demands being made on it. Fifth, it runs counter to genuinely European operational culture. Six, it entails extra cost and complicates command and communication equipment plans, as there are many options available, thanks to NATO, framework nation, or operation center to set up such command structure. Furthermore, because of the complexity of the Brussels machinery, military operation commanders are less likely to know who to approach in Brussels when they have urgent needs as regard intelligence, situation analysis, logistics, administrative and financial procedures, etc. Seven, the Political and Security Committee, which is responsible for political control and strategic direction of operation, can hardly act in real time, and the chair of the European Union Military Committee, though termed the first or primary point of contact, has no personal capacity, neither authority to respond swiftly. This situation implies a need not only to set up a permanent single command and control center for EU operation, but also to review accordingly the role and responsibilities of the EUMS in the conduct of operation. Another point to note is that much of the operation center facilities currently located within the EUMS have gradually been rendered unavailable because they have not been activated since 2007. The center could not therefore be activated without a serious delay, even if the Council were to take the necessary decision to activate it. Third item is the EU rapid response capability and battle group. A capability allowing the EU to respond rapidly to crisis was a need that found expression as soon as the CSDP came into being and is also covered by a specific concept updated in 2015. Since 2004, this need has translated first and foremost into battle groups, which are formed by member states and placed on standby according to a plan that they have approved in advance. The advantages of this concept lie in the fact that it encourages European armed forces to move towards deployability as well as multinational and regional military cooperation. The concept attempts to offset the EU's inertia caused by the lack of a permanent command structure by supplying units at high readiness. It has failed, however, to cement the EU's operational credibility, as no political decision has ever been taken to deploy BG so far. Improvement should therefore be sought in the first place at political level. in determining shared security interest, in particular among near neighbors, and also in elaborating solidarity principles among member states, as laid down in the Treaty of Lisbon preamble. In addition, the battle group concept should be made more flexible so as to enable the size of the groups to be adjusted according to the circumstances. You know, the problem of this concept is that we have set a format of force as susceptible of being deployed to all theaters. But lessons drawn from experience show that each operation is specific and requires specific format of forces. That is a problem. One final unanswered question is the financing of operation. Given that share costs are not properly taken into account, contributing nations have the impression of being penalized 3 times over, in that they have to run political risk in relation to the international community, they risk the loss of human lives, and they bear 80% of the cost of the operation. And I turn now to the last item I developed in my study, which is about force generation. When member states have to generate the forces necessary for the civilian and military operation that they have decided to launch within the EU framework, the process involved is, more often than not, a laborious one. The main reason is the lack of political will on the part of member states. In itself, however, the process, which is largely modeled on the NATO equivalent, offers a great deal of flexibility in that the choice of operating procedures and the intention to contribute are linked together at every stage of planning. From my perspective, if we would improve the force generation to EU operation, 2 ways might be explored. First, risks have to be shared at the EU level. And second, we should develop at the EU level EU's combat support capabilities integrated in order to reduce the cost for contributing nation with force. We could also envisage, it's a third orientation, but that has to be explored further, to stimulate member state contribution in offsetting contributors with financial advantages, for example. As regards civilian operation, the delays encountered in the force generation process, which is roughly 1 year in each case, could be reduced by further developing national rosters of experts deployable on mission and operation. Such pools of earmarked experts in police officers, judges, observers, etc., should help greatly to shorten response times. Consequently, the selection process of personnel, which has applied to individuals so far, each individual is listened by the CPCC here before to be approved, and it could be shortened. When the progress of, as a conclusion, when the progress of and the prospect for the CSDP in the operational sphere are compared with the European Council guidelines, the findings of do not seem altogether impressive. There is a yawning gap between avowed intention and the reality of the steps taken by member states. While the people living in the countries belonging to the EU, as surveys have regularly shown, favor a Europe-wide approach to their defense, they deplore Europe's poor performance in the numerous present-day crises and can see that the statements emanating from the European Council are at odds with reality. The chief obstacle to an effective CSDP is of a political nature, and that cannot be compensated for by technical or operational measures only. The Treaty of Lisbon entails an unambiguous commitment by the EU member states to developing a CFSP in an integration process, whose explicitly intended outcome is to establish common defense. It is written and agreed by all of our member states. The policy is supposed to be based on mutual solidarity among member states and to complement their national policies. Some of the treaty provisions have yet to be implemented. The global approach, a cornerstone to the EU intervention capability, must not cause, however, military form of action to be undervalued, underestimated, or underused. And there is a risk here because of global approach. Sometimes we privilege the civilian courses of action, but military have their own role to play. An effective CSDP needs a strategic framework, setting out specific objectives and political assumption for the use of armed forces themselves, derived from the common interest of the member states, and hence making it possible to prepare for ways of managing potential crises at European level. The priority at this stage should be to draw up a European white paper adopting a holistic approach of the defense of our continent in order to bring our member states' policies into the necessary coherent complementary relationship and make the EU, finally, a credible, effective guarantor of security in the world. Thank you for attention.